This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Have you ever browsed in incognito mode? It's probably not as incognito as you think. Google recently settled a $5 billion lawsuit after being accused of secretly tracking users in incognito mode. Google's defense? Incognito does not mean invisible. In fact, all of your online activity is still 100% visible to a ton of third parties, unless you use ExpressVPN. Without ExpressVPN, these third parties can still see every website you visit, even in incognito mode, whether it's your internet service provider, your mobile network provider, the admins of your Wi-Fi network. ExpressVPN reroutes 100% of your traffic through secure encrypted servers so third parties can't see your browsing history. It hides your IP address, it's easy to use, it works on all devices, and it's rated #1 by top tech reviewers like CNET and The Verge. I'm someone who likes to be very private online, so I'm a pretty big fan of ExpressVPN. I'm not a big fan of all of my data going out to these third parties, so I definitely use it. Protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/Johnston. That's expressvpn.com/Johnston. And you can get an extra 4 months free. expressvpn.com/Johnston.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your #1 destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
I don't think it could get any better in terms of Game 7s in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs than what we experienced this weekend. Winnipeg, at the last second in regulation, literally the last second, tying in regulation before going to double overtime to win. And then Mikko Rantanen going God mode in the third period against the Colorado Avalanche to win it for the Dallas Stars. CJ, which of those two Game 7s this past weekend did you enjoy more?
I don't think you can make me choose. I appreciate where you're taking me. Put it this way, just for historical context. Before this weekend, 3 times in history in a Game 7, there was a multi-goal third period comeback. Then you had 2 more happen on back-to-back nights. Like that sums it up. I mean, those are 2 of the crazier games under the circumstances, you know, where the Game 7 it means so much to both teams pretty plainly. One gets to keep playing. The others got, 4 or 5 months before their next big game. To have those kind of comebacks, I probably would pick the Winnipeg one. And it might just because I saw it second. It might be because I really thought they were dead, if that makes sense. I mean, to score 2 goals with Connor Hellebuck pulled from the net just to tie it. And then, you watch that first overtime period, like anything could happen. Every chance you're like, ooh. And, they found a way to win that game without Mark Scheifele playing at all, their top center. And they lost Josh Morrissey early on, their top defenseman. So, I mean, that was probably the less likely of the comebacks, but I don't want to overshadow or diminish what we saw in Dallas on Saturday because, the Avalanche felt like they had control of that game. It's just, Mikko Rantanen just came like a wave, especially the second goal. I know it goes in off his skate, but like he's coming down 1-on-3, bursts through, goes around the net. Like it just felt like he wouldn't be denied. And ultimately, that was kind of a nice feeling, I guess, for the Stars because they weren't denied in that game. And so that, we always hype up Game 7s no matter where they're played and who they're played between. But those were 2 that delivered on that hype.
Man, since it's fresher in our minds, I'll go to Winnipeg first because you're right. They were dead. Connor Hellebuck allowing those 2 goals to start off, like it looked bad for that team. I had it in my notes that St. Louis was going to find a way to win, and we're going to have to talk about how Winnipeg was going to have to recover after a year where it seemed like, for the most part, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think they were wire to wire the best team, and then for them to enter the playoffs getting upset in the first round, that franchise is in shambles. But of course, we're not talking about that today.
No, and look, they give them credit for that. The playoffs are hard. I think people lose sight of that. Like, especially the really good teams in the league, it's like they're almost expected to win, just like show up to the rink and they're up 1-0 in the series, and it doesn't go that way. St. Louis played as well as any team down the stretch of the second half of the season. Obviously, the games they played at home ice in this series, they chased Hellebuck from 3 of them. The Blues actually lost the series while scoring more total goals in the 7 games because the games were pretty one-sided that they won on home ice. So, I mean, it just illustrates kind of some of the unusual circumstances that happen there. But, what do you measure? You measure a team that finds a way. And obviously Winnipeg didn't quit on that game. Like, I'm such a fool. I'm usually, you know me, like I never get ahead of myself. I try not to assume too much. I was texting with our colleague, Mike Russo, and I was like, oh yeah, I went 5-3 on my first round picks. I missed the Lightning, the Jets, and the Avs. And then I literally pronounced them dead in a text, and then ended up watching for another an hour and a half, 2 hours. And they won the game. So they rescued me for a 6-2 first round, which isn't a bad showing. But yeah, that's not the important part. The important part is they were going to face hard questions. They've had some tough playoff outs the last few years, and, they've had a bunch of good regular seasons now in a row. So you start, it's probably a little bit where Colorado is going to find itself. Some different circumstances at play, but Colorado's had a lot of great regular seasons and kind of seen as a perennial contender. And they, haven't had a long playoff run since they won the cup. Winnipeg, this is only the 3rd time in Jets 2.0 history they're beyond the first round. That was the first ever Game 7 on home ice in Jets 2.0 history. Like, talk about being ready for the moment. I just saw that entire crowd basically standing for 5 periods of hockey, especially in the overtime. Didn't look like anyone was sitting down there. I mean, what an atmosphere. And to me, that just, the whole thing embodies what we love about the playoffs. Like, it's a microcosm about why we get excited talking about what's coming when we're in March and April. Now we're living it. And, not a lot of first upsets maybe in that first round, but St. Louis, I don't even know if it would have been an upset, but they had an upset in their hands anyway. They were the underdog, which was something Jim Montgomery kept playing on throughout the series.
I know, before we get to Dallas, Colorado, I know you loved just as much as I did Adam Lowry's post-game interview at TNT where Rick Bowness got to tell him that he loved him.
Yeah, he told him it back. I mean, obviously Bowness coached him for a couple of years. Rick Bowness was the head coach in Winnipeg when they made a captaincy change. The Jets took the captaincy away from Blake Wheeler and gave it to Adam Lowry. But one thing Bones said to him on that interview with TNT was, this is why you're the captain. And he didn't mean the goal. He meant the way the team kept fighting and the way they played in that game and in that series. And, Lowry mentioned too that he didn't like the way his series was going, that he'd met with his current coach, Scott O'Neill, after Game 6 to sort of work through aspects of his game. He felt like Braden Shen was getting the better part of a matchup that they were facing against each other a fair bit in that series. And, he finds a way to get rewarded with the sort of goal, frankly, you see in the playoffs, a redirection in front, lots of traffic. Certainly not highlight reel stuff, but it's what you expect from, a really, really good third line center, which is what Adam Lowry is. Obviously played maybe a little higher up the lineup in these circumstances with Scheifele out, but, heart and soul player. And he was wearing his heart on the sleeve in the interview. That's what I loved, is you could just tell what it meant to him. And, that's the sort of the agony and the ecstasy of playoffs, right? I mean, he's getting this nice moment. It's feeling like a just reward for an organization, for a fan base, for an ownership in Winnipeg. And then, on the other side of the table is, I mean, I think St. Louis, while they're obviously going to take this loss hard, probably from where they were during the regular season, making a coaching change, they ultimately, when the dust settles, this will probably be viewed as a positive season, still a positive step, the turnaround they had. But, Colorado, Dallas, like, talk about the extreme poles of emotion. Just because both teams really did feel like they could go on and win the cup, and the one that advanced just might. We'll see what the Stars can muster. The odds makers right now say that Dallas and Florida are the 2 favorites to win the cup, remaining among the final 8 standing. And then Colorado, they're just like, what? We're already done. It's the first week of May. Like, what? How did this happen? And obviously, they missed on a chance to close at home, and then they fumbled away a lead in Game 7. I mean, that's going to sit with them all summer.
That series, we knew basically from weeks out that we were going to get that series, and it looked like a Western Conference final. That's not something you see in your first round. That should be a Western Conference final. It delivered. It went to 7. Go ahead.
Can I jump in with a point there? Because I saw so much talk about that specific point, like around this final game. Like, I think we've been getting this for years in this playoff format. It's why I don't like the playoff format. like every year there's one series like this that happens in the first round. It's been like Boston and Toronto going back years ago when they were literally like first and fifth in the league. Last year, I believe it was Dallas and Vegas played in round one, and they were two of the top five teams in the league. And it's to me, it's an ultimate fault of the playoff system, but it's not new in this round. Like I felt like a lot of people were acting like this was the greatest injustice in time. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. This injustice to me gets, if you want to call it that, it gets committed every time in the playoffs. I mean, basically, when you have a divisional playoff format, it boils down to this. One division is going to be really strong in any given year. And frankly, it's been the Atlantic going back. This year, it definitely is the Central. I'm certainly not debating that point, but it's often the same divisions, and it makes it harder for those teams. Like I think we should 100% go back to a conference playoff format. I'll get off my soapbox, but you just twinged my mind to it because I kept seeing people going like, oh, it's so unfair. This doesn't even count as a first round loss. I'm like, wait a minute. Well, then we've got to go back through history and uncount a bunch of first round losses because this format has always been kind of wonky in terms of the matchups in round one in particular.
So I'm with you. We definitely need to go back to a 1-8 setup. It's just, I feel like all I hear in my ears right now is like Commissioner Gary Bettman being like, well, we still got some amazing first round series. Dallas, Colorado was amazing. Winnipeg, St. Louis, all these series in the, I just hear the counterpoint being, hey, even though the format is what it is, we still got some damn good series out of it.
Fair. And maybe the truth is if you almost mix and match any of the 16 playoff teams, we're going to have good series because of what's at stake and the way the players put themselves on the line. I just think it's not necessarily fair for the organizations. Now, the other counter to my counter, you got to beat the great teams to be a great team, right? Like you have to go to win a Stanley Cup. The expectation shouldn't be that you're just beating pushover teams either. So, at some point, I think you just have to make peace. If the league's not going to change it, make peace with the fact. I didn't like the commentary that that's not a first round playoff loss for Colorado. Cause I'm like, frankly, it is. Mm-hmm. If they had to finish with more points in the regular season, they would look at, if they won the division, they would have still got St. Louis. So there was no easy matchup out there for them. But, I don't want to let anyone off the hook because I feel like every year this scenario plays out where there's one matchup that just doesn't really make sense for round one. And this year, the bingo card had Dallas, Colorado on that matchup.
Before we go through Nathan McKinnon and the Colorado Avalanche, we need to take a moment to appreciate Mikko Rantanen's third period. A hat trick, an assist, a hand on all four goals. Like, I think that's one of the greatest revenge performances in sports history, considering the circumstances, considering how we got to Dallas in the first place. I know Colorado didn't directly trade him there, but he still ends up on a rival team and plays against his former team in the first round. And it was marqued as the Mikko Rantanen Bowl, and he's the one who decides it ultimately in the end. I don't know if it's the greatest revenge performance. It's one of the greatest revenge performances considering the circumstances. Absolutely.
Well, and let's revisit the point that's important. He didn't want to leave Colorado, right? Like it's since come out that they were about $250,000 a year on a long-term contract that's totaling many millions apart in negotiations when the Avalanche decided to trade him. Colorado didn't have to trade him. They obviously made that determination internally that they weren't going to go to certain numbers, that they felt this was the best course forward. But, they didn't have to in that moment. That storyline is amazing when you think of the whole course of it from, it was in January 24th, I think it was, he got traded to Carolina. Like from that point, that was a stunning move. Then of course there's like the rumors, oh, he's not going to sign in Carolina. Will or won't they trade him? Ultimately they move him at the deadline to Dallas and then to play Colorado. Like you're right. You couldn't script that. Like that's sports movie kind of stuff. That's drama. And good on him because, he had one assist in the first 4 games of the series. A lot of people were asking pointed questions of him, as they should. The reason Dallas and Carolina, frankly, the reason 2 teams traded for him this year is because this guy's one of the best playoff performers of his generation, just in terms of straight points per game. But this is the first playoff series that he's not played alongside Nathan McKinnon. he was playing on the other side, just the way it turned out. And there was lots of people commenting or opining that he needed, one of the game's best players, number 29 in Burgundy, to help drive those point totals. And for 4 games, it looked like those people were right. And then you watch the entirety of the series, and then you get to the end of 7 games, you're like, oh, wow, maybe this guy is okay. He's not on his own either. He's got good teammates in Dallas, but the point being, he's a driver of play. And so, yeah, it was an epic performance. I don't think we'll soon forget under the circumstances. And I think it's important for any player, because players always come under fire, star players in the playoffs, when either the puck luck's not going their way, maybe they're injured, maybe they're just not performing well, they're too much in their own heads, they're playing good teams, whatever it is. There's a great way to rewrite your own narrative. If you have a great next game and next game after that, then everyone forgets that you got criticized for the 4 that came before it. And so I think that's part of what makes the playoffs hard, is those wild swings of emotion, swings of atmosphere, swings of questioning and fans' thoughts and media thoughts and everything. But Rantanen's he's done this before too, right? Like he's won a Stanley Cup and been in lots of series, and now, I could see why Dallas is favored. Now you feel like they get through that round, they get a chance to get Miro Heiskanen back in their lineup, and Jason Robertson. They were missing, their top D and one of their top forwards in that series. Now all of a sudden, with the wind at their back, maybe they can find a way to go on a run of their own.
Okay, we need to delve into Colorado. Man, just thinking of the fact that they allow that power play go-ahead goal. Jack Drury, who's part of the initial trade for Rantanen, is in the penalty box. And then Wyatt Johnston coming up huge. Obviously, Rantanen gets the assist. Rantanen ices the game. Then you see the handshake line, and then Nathan McKinnon in the locker room. The quote going around, they were missing their best D and maybe their best forward. We still couldn't beat them. So, yeah, I don't know what we're going to do. Where does Colorado go from here?
It's still too soon to say. I mean, obviously, they're going to have some holes to fill in the lineup. I mean, they traded for Brock Nelson, who's a UFA, likely won't be back. So they're going to have a bit of money to spend this summer. Would think that they're going to be looking for another center to use some of that cap space and just roster space on. I think they have to fundamentally look under the hood and decide directionally if things are going well, because, they've won 1 playoff series in the last 3 seasons, which, it's not a terrible record. Do you know how many teams would love to say, hey, we got the playoffs 3 straight years and we won around one of the years? But obviously the bar is much higher there, where, they were coming off a cup year, heading into that 3-year run afterwards. And they've dealt with a lot. I mean, Gabriel Landeskog wasn't available until, a couple games in this series during that period, their captain. And so, I don't know that it will end up looking like a full scale shakeup, but in that moment, it is an earthquake. And one of the things I love about Nathan McKinnon, in addition to his ability on the ice, is he just tells it like it is. Like, he's very much an emotional guy, very much honest about where things are. I think back to when before they'd won the cup and they got beat out one year, and he's just like, we haven't won shit in my career. Like, he was like, I like that, because he was showing passion for their inability to take that step. And he was wanting to hold himself and everyone around him to a higher standard. I think that's how I hear that quote there. Like, I think that quote's directed, if you're sitting as his teammate, you read that could be directed at you. If you're sitting as GM seat as Chris McFarland is, you can read that as like, I don't know what we're going to do around here. It's like, well, somebody better get a plan, right? Like, that's the next part of it. I mean, Nathan McKinnon is one of the best players in the game, and he's got Cale Makar, one of the other best players in the game among his teammates, in addition to a whole bunch of other really good players. So that's a collection right there that should be, that is, obviously, we know it's of cup caliber, that we've seen it before, but they need to figure out the right pieces around them. And unfortunately for the Avalanche, Mikko Rantanen isn't an option anymore. So, we'll have to see where they go, but it's certainly a team with an interesting offseason ahead. And I don't think there's like one easy answer there. Like, other than they're going to need another centerman of some degree of note because of what they've lost, right? They traded Middlestad away in the Coyle deal at the deadline. They're likely to lose Nelson. I mean, there's just it's funny how many teams Julian, I'm just thinking now, like you asked me, like Montreal, they were beat out. What do they need? Well, they need a center. Like, feels like a lot of the teams that just got beat out that are good teams are like missing a piece, and they're all missing kind of, I think it's more coincidence than anything, although it does speak to just the value of having, impact centerman on your team. But yeah, there's going to be some roster tweaking there. We'll see if they make any deeper changes around them. I think they'd be foolish to overreact to the loss, but clearly it's one they have to take seriously, and they have to find ways. Frankly, they got to win a game at the end of the playoff series where they got it. It was right there for them. Even that they lost the game that Landeskog came back. I know that that's a little narrative driven to say, but you would just take the emotional boost of that game on home ice in game 3. Like this is one of those series, and every team can do this to a degree, but like you can really look back from Colorado's end and be like, how did we lose this? Because I feel like there's 2 or 3 or 4 significant moments in that series where it went against Colorado. And you're just like, how does that happen that we lost this? And actually, I misspoke. I said Colorado had a chance of closing game 6. They actually forced game 7 in game 6. Dallas had a chance. Sorry, I don't even know what day it is. Up is down right now.
It's all good. It's all good.
I know we're on to round 2, though.
Yes, you are on to round 2. I'm just wondering how likely Chris McFarland, GM of the Colorado Avalanche, will be to make another drastic move. I mean, I know you're in the GM spot. Moves like that have to happen. Considering this year, you'll be defined by the drastic move you made on Mikko Rantanen. How much that might affect the likelihood of him trying to do anything of that sort in the offseason, or wanting to play it safe, or maybe you just have to shut that out, or whether it's a trade, whether it's something else. I'm not sure what, but I'm very curious to know how Chris McFarland will go about this offseason. I can't imagine what he's been thinking these last few days.
Yeah, I mean, like that goes as bad as it can go if you make that. I mean, it's so difficult to make the original trade he did with Carolina, right? I mean, he would have known the avalanche, pun intended, of criticism that was going to accompany that move, or questions. But to have it come back so directly in your face, it's probably not what he was expecting, right? I mean, I don't think there's any way none of us were imagining Carolina flipping Rantanen. The worst you might have, if you were game planning this way as a GM, the worst you might have been thinking is like he signs somewhere in a division as a free agent. Like he doesn't stay in Carolina, but like you wouldn't have been thinking he was getting flipped within 6 weeks and would be playing you in round 1. I mean, that's again, it's pretty dramatic. I think that it's good for the sport. I didn't have a rooting interest, but I'm just saying that whole series was kind of a spectacle of sorts, and didn't go Colorado's way. And now you're right. I think there is a danger in overreacting, but at the same time, you might counter and say there's a danger in having 2 of the top 5 players in the world and not doing enough to give them a chance to win. And so, we'll have to see what kind of decisions they land on when, I think they fully processed all that's happened here.
Absolutely. Okay, let's run through the playoff series in the second round. We should start. Oh, you go ahead. I thought you were going to say something. Real quick. Go ahead.
Well, we should mention, because it's actually quite unusual, Nathan McKinnon is also committed to going to the
I was
World
going to
Hockey
mention that too.
Championship.
I was going to mention that too. It slipped my mind. You go on that. That literally slipped my mind. That was the next thing I was going to go to, and then I skipped the playoffs. Yes, he is going to go, and his buddy Sidney Crosby will join him too.
Yeah, and look, for these guys, I think they had such a special time playing together at Four Nations. 11 years ago, they played for Canada at a World Hockey Championship, won gold together. But the opportunities for them to play together are not bountiful. And also, it's being done in this window where, it's the Olympic cycle is on, right? The Olympics are going to be in Milan next year. And I'm sure part of this decision is just, it's a chance, yes, for competitive hockey. It's a chance to do something good for Canada. But it's also setting the tone for the Olympics to come, because these are obviously 2 of Canada's most important players for that tournament. So I think it's notable. I covered that tournament over the years, Julian, and I'll say when a player goes through a tough matchup, a tough playoff loss, they often end up over there. But it's usually a European star that does that. Alex Ovechkin has, over his career, like he's parachuted in and just played like a semifinal game. Last year, David Pastrnak lost in in the second round. It wasn't even the first. He came over late and helped the Czechs win gold. It just usually isn't the Canadian stars. Usually if star players come, it's because their team missed the playoffs. They had lots of time to think about it. They prepare and they go. But, pretty cool that both McKinnon and Crosby are going. I'm curious to see who else is compelled to go now. They did announce a roster of 15 or so players, but there's room to add to that. And I would think when you've got the Cole Harbor duo signed up, there could be some other pretty high level players that are wanting to go over there. And we should mention Canada doesn't yet really have NHL goaltenders over there. So, I don't know what the options are going to be. Montembeault was hurt in the first round. He's obviously out. Maybe Jordan Binnington might think about going. He played for Canada at the Worlds last year and obviously at the Four Nations, just lost out with St. Louis. But, it'll be interesting to see what Canada does in net. But their forward group just got a mega boost and within 24 hours of the Avalanche losing, which, again, not something we typically see from a Canadian team. And I think the environment we're in informs that. Obviously, two special friends, unique opportunity that neither guy wants to be even available ever again in his career at this time. But also, I think the factor in the Olympic window, is a big driver for them.
By the way, if Canada wins the World Championship this year with Sidney Crosby on it, Sidney Crosby would become the fourth member of the Triple Gold Club to win each honor, the Olympics, the Worlds, the Stanley Cup, twice. I don't know if you can think of the other three players to have done it.
Boy.
I have the answers in front of me. You don't have to stress yourself too much, but I do want to see if you can figure this out. Oh, he's thinking about this. I gave him the out. Okay. Slava Fedosov, Igor Larionov, and Peter Forsberg. Those are the three other names.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a pretty special company.
What's crazy is Crosby would have a chance at the triple gold club if he were to get in. You don't want to get ahead of yourself, but he's going to have a chance to play for another Olympic gold. He's already got 3 Stanley Cup wins and potentially, there could be future world championships. So
that's true. That is very true.
Canada doesn't lose with this guy. I'm not even kidding. Like I don't have the updated number. I always dust it off. I think they were 45-4 going into the Four Nations with them, and they went 3-1. So they're like 48-5 with Crosby playing for them. The one year they didn't win, I actually covered the tournament. The 2006 Worlds, Crosby went after his first NHL season. Canada lost a heartbreaking game to Sweden in the semifinals and then was out of the tournament. But they lost. The game was like 5-4, and actually Crosby scored a crazy goal in that game off of center ice faceoff. And one of the Swedish defensemen cross-checked him in the face while he was celebrating. It was actually like Morgan Riley, Ridley Gregg-esque, minus the empty net part of that. But and I don't even remember if there was a penalty called. Anyway, long ago memories. Point is, Canada's chances of winning go up when they've got 87 in the lineup.
When are you writing a book on all of your times covering international hockey? Seems like you have all these interesting stories from every time you go cover the Worlds or something like that.
I mean, I can defer to you on this. I feel like writing a book is a real. I have to find a topic I would really want to go in on, just because I know you got to sit there with you and your computer screen a lot of hours, and you got to really want to do it. I'm not saying like everybody wants the finished product. Everyone wants to say, hey, I did this thing. But I do not underestimate the amount of work that goes into it. And I'm busy enough these days. So I'm not saying I won't get there one day. For sure, your career takes on lots of twists and turns, but I'm not even thinking that way right now.
Dude, just if you ever get to that point, let me tell you, writing a book, I feel like it takes so much of your mental capacity. Like you mentioned, you're busy enough as it is, like, adding that would just be, oh my God.
Both of us write for a living. I know we're talking now into a microphone, but I don't like writing anything other than, because I love my job, don't get me wrong, but I feel like that uses whatever percentage of my brain I want to use for writing time, that gets eaten up with my job. And I don't write personally or anything. Like everything I write is about hockey and it gets published at The Athletic. Please subscribe.
Yes, please subscribe to The Athletic. We'd really appreciate that. Anyways, now we should get to the playoff matchup. Sorry, I forgot about the World Championship thing. We should start with the series that you're covering. the Florida Panthers and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Game 1 beginning Monday night at the Scotiabank Arena. The fact that the Leafs are here, not a complete surprise, but the fact that they run up against the Florida Panthers, a team that I think a lot of people thought, with the way that they were ending their year, with some of the injuries that were plaguing them, maybe they would look dead in the water in the first round, but they look like the favorites. I think they are the favorites in this round against the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, as I mentioned, they're the favorites to go all the way to the cup, to win the cup right now in the whole league. So, I mean, that makes sense. They've been to 2 straight finals. You might argue they got better this year with some of the moves they made, and they still have all the key players that won those cups. I mean, they lost a lot of the depth players from last year's championship team, but they held on to the main cast. And so it's a huge challenge for the Leafs. If I look for areas where we might see the Leafs upset here, it's a couple of ways. In 2023, these teams played a 5-game series, which most people have probably forgotten. But the one thing with that series is Sergei Bobrovsky was out of his mind. I think his save percentage was about .945 in that series. 3 of the games went to overtime. And so when I think of like what could have changed between then and now, I sort of feel like there's a world maybe Bobrovsky is just good and he's got a .915, which is very good, but it's not .945, and that could make some kind of difference. The Leafs, Ottawa took a lot out of them in the sense that was not an easy series. We say the same thing. 3 of the games went to overtime. The last game was tied in the third period until Max Pacioretty scored, pretty late in the game to end up giving the Leafs a narrow regulation win. But I think that they feel like they got through a big test there, and they have a little bit of confidence. We'll see. Like the only thing that's been in the back of my mind, I've said this in the last round, I was totally wrong, was like, does Florida ever run out of gas? Like Matthew Tkachuk is playing 12 minutes, 13 minutes a night. Like he's clearly not at 100%. All the guys on the team, or most of the key players, have just played hundreds of games the last few years. At some point, maybe they don't have that juice. But I mean, entering the series, there's no reason to point to say that. They had 5 days off from ending the Tampa series. And so this is going to be tough for Toronto. The Panthers are an elite forechecking team. They're going to bring everything they can at the Leafs D in particular, go after guys like, and I mean, in a legal way, although they like to play in the gray too, a little bit, the Panthers. But go after guys like Chris Tanev and the Leafs defense. Like the areas the Leafs have improved are on the blue line. But obviously, they didn't see a forecheck like the one they're going to see. I mean, there's just not a team currently in the league that brings the heat like Florida does in that manner. So I think it's going to be a battle. I don't think it's going to be a short series, but I see it the way you do, in that clearly I enter this thinking Florida's the favorite, and Toronto's got to find ways to poke holes in their armor, so to speak, to come out on top. And, in net is one way that it could happen. Specialty teams, if Florida takes some penalties, that was certainly a recipe the Leafs used at times in that Ottawa series for success. And then ultimately just try to wear Florida down themselves. But, what was fascinating also, Julian, when you look back, Barkov and Matthews lines basically went head to head the whole series. There were no goals scored at 5-on-5 on either side. Like basically the top lines totally sawed one another off offensively, and then it was decided down the lineup. If that happens again, Florida has the edge. Florida has Brad Marchand on the third line right now. Anton Lundell, it was a very good two-way centerman, and has showed in times when Barkov's been injured, like he can contribute offensively. The Leafs like what they have going on with their Lawton line, but I just think it's, if they have to get, the Leafs have to find a way to get an edge on specialty teams, or maybe that Matthews line somehow wins at what will be a very, very, very tough matchup. But it's the rare series where I don't think either team is really going to be, both teams will be comfortable, like going Barkov versus Matthews, at least to start. It's not like when Ottawa came to Toronto, they tried to get, or the other way around, when Toronto went to Ottawa, they're trying to get Pinto out against Matthews and had some success doing so. This is less of a chess match and a bit more like, all right, your best against our best, and let's see what happens.
Yeah. One other key that needs to be mentioned too, I thought in that first round series between Toronto and Ottawa, it took a little bit of time, but Ottawa eventually realized, okay, we have to get some traffic in front of Anthony Stolarz to make his life difficult. I don't think there's going to be any adjustment period for Florida with that. Like from the moment go, they'll have figured that out. And I think there's going to be a lot put on Anthony Stolarz to hold things up for Toronto. This is going to be a big series for him.
Yeah, and like probably some mixed emotions in there too. He won, he was with Florida last year when they won a cup. I'm sure I know that goes by the wayside within probably 2 minutes of the first game, but he's also never started 6 games in a row in his NHL career, which he just did against Ottawa. Now he's about to start a 7th in a row in game 1 of the Panthers series. And, he did have a couple days to refresh a bit, recover, get ready for this one. But you just wonder at some point if just out of the normal course of action, Joseph Woll, comes into this series, the Leafs backup. They split starts between those goalies most of the season, and wouldn't surprise me again, just because Anthony Stolarz has never been a bona fide number 1 NHL goalie who plays every game. And I think that it's not hard to imagine that could catch up with him either in his play. Maybe he's just feeling fatigued and he reports that to the team. And at some point in the series, they decide to swap it out. I don't know how that's going to get handled, but you're right. There's a lot on his shoulders. He knows exactly what he's going up against because he worked with Bobrovsky firsthand all last season and understands the guy's won a couple of Vezas plus the cup he won last year. So, what happens with the goaltending will probably, as I think a lot of series, but it could be one of the tilting factors. And, Stolarz actually outplayed Bobrovsky in the regular season by the numbers, but can he do it in this environment playing basically every other night? Remains to be seen, but it's a tall ask. It's going to be a difficult task for him.
Yeah. I see this series going Florida in 6. We obviously know about how good they are, but I really think we'll see a Leafs team put up a fight. I was really impressed at how they handled things defensively at 5-on-5 in the first round, particularly with the Tanev and McCabe pairing and just how they were able to lock down the opposition. I get Ottawa was Ottawa, but I still think that they'll be able to get something off this Florida team. I don't see this being a quick series at all. I think the Leafs deserve some credit.
Well, and they got to take care of business at home because if you actually look at this postseason, right now it's the second best record in total for home teams. For whatever reason, teams have been getting the job done at home. Obviously, the Winnipeg St. Louis series was a total homer series where the home team won every game. And the Leafs do have home ice advantage. They're starting with games 1 and 2 at Scotiabank Arena. I think if they can, it's imperative that they win at least one, but maybe even the first 2 games on home ice, because that's been an area in this playoffs for whatever reason that it's an area where they have an edge, I guess is all I'm saying. And clearly they went 2-1 against Ottawa on home ice, and probably if they're going to steal this series or whatever you want to call it, find a way to win it as an underdog, I think it'll be driven on the backs of success in front of their home fans.
Okay. Anything else you want to add before we run through the remaining second round series?
All good. We're going to be digging into this one in the next few shows. So
give me one big thought on Edmonton, Vegas. That looks like that's going to be fun.
Yeah. You have 2 of the the goaltending matchup is fascinating. Look, in Edmonton, LA, what was everyone talking about is, can they break through the defensive system of the Kings, have success? You saw Draisaitl, McDavid, and even some of their, in the closeout games, some of their guys down the lineup have some pretty big offensive nights. That's going to be a bigger challenge against Vegas. Vegas probably has the most complete blue line in the league. They come at you 4-ish lines deep, 3.5 lines deep. I mean, pretty complete team and obviously very experienced team. And it feels like Edmonton is like a staggered fighter in a boxing match, but they're still finding a way to, through will and to punch on, to keep pushing back. I think it's as simple with the Oilers, quite honestly, is what can McDavid and Draisaitl do? Obviously there's 18 other guys dressed on any given night and their roster's deeper than that, but those players carried them last year in the playoffs. They carried them through that round after being down 2-0. I mean, even game 1, they lost LA. McDavid has that crazy third period. What's fascinating to me is just how far can they go with clearly a team that has some deficiencies, but they have the ultimate make good in McDavid and Draisaitl. So I'm fascinated to see how that matchup goes. I mean, Jack Eichel's coming off a great year too. Shouldn't overlook what he can do in the series, but I still see Edmonton having to find a way to gut their way through this one, despite some defensive lapses, despite the fact they might not have the best goaltending in the series, but they certainly have the best two offensive forces on their side.
Okay, we talked about how Dallas and Winnipeg got out of their first round series. They end up playing against each other in the second round. Give me one big thought on Dallas and Winnipeg.
Well, Winnipeg, the status of Scheifele and Morrissey is going to be imperative to, where they're at. I mean, it's funny, both teams missing a top forward, top defenseman, because I could say, I guess, the same for Heiskanen and Robertson. But, I think the good news for the Jets is they don't start till Wednesday in game one. They do get some time to put that behind them. But both teams obviously played emotional series back and forth. And so they're in similar conditions that way. I think this will be a heavyweight battle. I think, especially the piece I don't know is I don't know where the health of those players is going to be, but assuming the best guys get in this series, this could definitely be a 7-gamer for me. As good as Dallas is and as deserving as they are of the idea that they're the top contender in the West, I think that they could be beaten still. There's a lot of praise for Ottinger at the end of that series, which was earned, but he wasn't very good at the start of that series. It's not as though I don't think you're looking at a player who can't be gotten to. I think the Jets have a pretty good idea of what it's going to take to grind through these games. And so I see a slug 'em out matchup, my man. I don't know about if you see one side or the other heavily favored. I mean, I suppose the Stars are favored, but they're starting, in Winnipeg. I mean, the Jets are 4-0 in that building. Like that to me is a real home ice advantage on all kinds of levels. But, the feeling around those games, the way the crowd is there, I see this going 6 or 7 and it wouldn't surprise me if Winnipeg finds a way to pull out an upset.
Okay. Oh, wow. Ooh, upset. I like that. Okay. Washington, Carolina. One big thought on that series.
They've had forever to wait for it, right? Like both teams have been done for a while. And both teams knew they were probably going to face each other. The way the Metro was set up this year, they were clearly the top teams in the division for most of the season. Carolina's had so long to prepare for this that they signed 2 players to contracts. Taylor Hall and Frederick Anderson both got extensions since their last playoff game against New Jersey. So, where is this one going to be won? I mean, goaltending it'll be interesting for Carolina. Can they hold up there? Can they score enough? It feels like a lot of familiar. Look, this team has got past the first round in 7 straight years, right? But they haven't advanced beyond the Eastern Conference Final ever during that time, and haven't been able to get over the playoff hump. But I think, do they have enough of the game breakers that can do that? Washington has some good vibes going against Montreal, and really all this season, right? The whole goal chase that Ovi was on and everything, they just found a way to kind of rejuvenate themselves as a team. I think, again, I see it as a close series, a good series. It's 2 of the best teams. Like, this is what I was saying earlier about this playoff format. Like, this is the sort of second round series you should see. I really don't have a prediction on it. I think when I did my predictions at the start of the playoffs, I had Carolina over Washington, and getting to the conference final. But I must say, I don't feel passionate about that one. I wonder, how the goaltending will go. Big part of Frederick Anderson, like, you get why they signed him. When he's been playing for the Hurricanes, he's been great, including in these playoffs. His goal saved above expected numbers, among the best of all goalies in the playoffs. But, he has had health challenges. He left that New Jersey series for a time injured. Can he get through another round, and will they score enough is kind of how I'm looking at this. I think that the Capitals do have a pretty deep offensive team, especially if Protas is back for them, playing 30-goal guy this year, plus Ovechkin, Strome, Pierre-Luc Dubois. Like, they've got some weapons there, Chikrin on the back end. I think, look, 2 evenly matched teams, and let's see. Drop the gloves and let's go.
Okay, so I have Florida, Vegas, Dallas, and I'm picking Carolina in that series. Those are my 4 out of that first round. We're pretty close, I think, aligned. Well, I get the sense we're kind of aligned on some. I'm not going to ask you to do the prediction, but I get the sense of where I think you're going in all 4 of those series.
Yeah, but I'll say Washington, Carolina, I don't feel like I picked Carolina, but I see it as kind of a toss-up a little bit, like a bit of a coin flip sort of series. Like it's hard for me to build a compelling argument in my mind. Like it's got to be this team for this reason. Like I don't see that. I have more questions, I guess, about how Carolina is going to hold up defensively in net and will they score enough, which is obviously 3 key parts of the game. So like I just feel like I have a few more questions about them, and that's why I'm not sure. But they also have very experienced. It's been a while since Washington's been here. It's a tough one for me to handicap. You can see I'm doing my work out loud here, and it's like I'm going in all directions. So I'll stick with the Hurricanes because that's what I picked initially, but I'm not saying it with a lot of vigor.
Fair. Okay, we go to the coaching carousel, which we love to cover around this time of year. This is the first episode we're doing since Mike Sullivan took over as the new head coach of the New York Rangers. Rather fast, since him and the Pittsburgh Penguins decided to part ways, and then he ends up on Broadway. What did you know about how fast that came together?
Well, look, I mean, we talked about him, how appealing it was for him to become a free agent at this time, especially when it was sort of clear that him and the Penguins organization were going in different directions, so to speak. You know, he became the highest paid coach as part of this deal. It's a big money organization. Like I don't see it as that big a surprise. You know, well, people linked him to teams like Boston and elsewhere, which I could see maybe from a lifestyle fit. You know, I don't think the Bruins at this stage where they're kind of rebuilding would be a team splashing, you know, $6+ million on a coach at this point in time. I wouldn't surprise me at all if the Bruins end up with their coaching search go with someone a little younger. Look for the next Spencer Carberry, you know? And so, you know, I can understand the fit. I don't think the Rangers are ready to, well, I know they're not ready to just move past the team that won the President's Trophy and got the Eastern Conference Final. You know, this is a different group now. They've made some changes, but they're looking for a reboot on the fly. And, you know, it's something Mike Sullivan did in Pittsburgh once upon a time. The Penguins were kind of a mess. It's a little bit forgotten about when he got there, and pretty quickly he helped get them on track. They made some personnel moves that helped things along too. But, you know, he changed the culture in Pittsburgh, and that's what they're paying him that kind of money on Broadway. So, you know, I think it made sense from jump that's where he ended up. And, you know, I think it's a great fit. You know, who knows what's going to happen? That organization's a little unpredictable, but, you know, I do think that it makes a whole bunch of sense that he ended up there, and he's getting well compensated to do so. And so the bar gets pushed up for coaches around the league.
So Mike Sullivan off the market. What about Rick Tocchet? What about Jay Woodcroft? What about some of the other names and vacancies around? Well,
what my sense is right now is the interview processes around these openings is really picking up. Like they're, you know, in some cases you make the coaching change. It's not like the next day you're lining up a bunch of interviews, but it really does feel like it's heating up. You know, a name I'll throw at you that maybe hasn't been out there a ton is Mitch Love, who's an assistant coach on Spencer Carberry's staff. You know, he's someone that I think has a really good chance of landing one of these positions. I think Jay Woodcroft is in good spot to get one because there's been interest on his end. You know, Tocchet until Philadelphia makes a decision, and if it's not Rick Tocchet, then I'm going to say, you know, that one makes too much sense for both sides to look past. You know, Anaheim kind of has an interesting decision because, as we know, they've talked to Joel Quenneville and are due to have a second interview with him. They've also talked to David Carl, right, who's at the other end of the coaching spectrum, just in terms of age and experience level. And, you know, don't know where that's going to go exactly, but, you know, that they're talking to one of the most experienced coaches you could have, who's won multiple Stanley Cups. But it's also been out of the game for some time. And then you have David Carl, who's, you know, made his name in the NCAA ranks with Team USA at the World Juniors. So, you know, they're really running the gamut there. You know, it's almost hard to round it all up. But I do think in making some calls on this and just talking to people about some of these openings, like Spencer Carberry actually low key has kind of opened the door, I think, for some of the lesser name coaches, we'll call them, because he's had so much success since getting to Washington, and wasn't necessarily a huge name. I mean, certainly had made his name, both in the Capitals organization. He was an assistant with the Maple Leafs before getting that job. But I do think teams now are like, let's find the next him. So it's not all just the people that bring experience that are in the mix for these jobs, which is why I mentioned Mitch Love's name. So yeah, I mean, that's a flavor of what's going on, but it's still kind of chaos right now with so many openings and, teams doing multiple interviews of candidates across the board. But I do think we're going to start seeing some of these positions get filled here in the near future.
The Mitch Love mention, very fascinated to see where he ends up in all of this. If he ends up picking somewhere, this is a guy who I think he thought he would have had a really good chance at that Calgary job when it was opened up. Remember, he coached the AHL team before Daryl Sutter was let go. Or he parted ways, essentially. But yeah, I'm very intrigued at that with how he's handled young players. He definitely had that reputation of like he could be one of the next guys coming up. So that's really interesting to hear his name come up in the search. I think
he's going to end up somewhere. It's just too soon to say where because there's multiple teams around him.
Absolutely. Very fascinated to see how his name goes. Rick Tocchet, obviously. Very intrigued about Vancouver, who ends up filling that spot over there too. Some of the names potentially internally could be filling in, or maybe they get someone outside. Manny
Malhotra will get some look there. He's been coaching the American Hockey League team this season. I think the Penguins are going to look internally. David Quinn was on their bench. Could see him certainly getting serious consideration and maybe getting that job. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, man. Like it's the Wild West if you're a coach in the league.
Absolutely. And with that, I think it's time to get to questions for Ask CJ. Ready to answer some questions?
Yes, guy.
Taylor Choma, excuse me, hopefully I'm saying the name right, has a question for each of us. For you, CJ, do you think it's strange that there's no Saturday game in the Leafs-Florida series?
Yes and no, because it's a round that has 3 Canadian teams playing, and so I don't think, first of all, the U.S. networks have the hammer. And so they get, I think they have a little more say at the table in terms of scheduling. And then the second part is I don't think Sportsnet minds having the Leafs on a Friday and Sunday. I think those slots do well, especially when they can roll out an Oilers game on a Saturday, for example. And obviously the Jets made it through as well. So, the Leafs, if you look back over the history, and I just know because I've covered all these games, they've played lots of Fridays and Sundays in playoffs in the last number of years. And so it's not like they get guaranteed every Saturday. I know Sportsnet and Hockey Night in Canada would love to have them on a Saturday, but it's not a must. And let's face it, at this stage, I think in Canada, you're getting a really good national audience for a Leafs game. You could play it at almost any window and you're going to get people tuning in pretty good numbers. So, Sportsnet seems comfortable with that. And that's how we ended up with this. I did think it was just going to be every other day and they would end with the game 7 on a Saturday, May 17th. But they ended up building in a double off day. So no Saturday games in this round.
Also from Taylor, this question's for me. How was covering your first playoff series? So it technically wasn't my first playoff series, but it was the first time I ever had to travel to cover the playoffs. And also first time covering the playoffs with no COVID capacity restrictions. So it felt very different from like 4 years ago when I was still in Montreal looking at the Canadiens run. Completely different set of circumstances. And I had so much fun. It was amazing. I never thought in a million years I would ever get to a point in my career where I'd be covering the Battle of Ontario. And it was amazing. It was great, obviously, working with you, Siege, and the rest of the Leafs writers at The Athletic, but also just going to these games, just seeing how fans were going back and forth, hearing the crowd atmosphere at the CTC. I had a lot of fun covering that series. So it was really great.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I'm sure one thing you figure out pretty quickly is time has just disappears when you're doing this. Like, I know it's long maybe when you're a fan between games at times, but when you're doing our job, like it just feels like you never get off the hamster wheel. And I love it. It's the hamster wheel you don't want to get off. So it's certainly not a complaint, but man, it's a grind.
But also, when you do get off that hamster wheel, like, I know I didn't want to do anything. I legit had a day in the last couple of days where all I just did was, like, I spent 90% of it, like, maybe not 90, but like 75% of it in bed. Just like, I'm not doing anything today.
You crashed.
Shit today. I crashed, which was good. I've worked my way back up from that. Richard, if the Leafs cannot make it to the finals, do you guys want to see Carolina, Dallas in the final for the Rantanen double revenge tour?
I hadn't even thought of that. Be a pretty good storyline. Lots of Finns between those teams too. It'd be like the Finnish Bowl. Look, I'm kind of the view. I don't cheer for any Stanley Cup final. Like I think that two teams that get there, takes so much to get there that every final should kind of be celebrated, if that makes sense to me. I know that sometimes we get wrapped up in, well, it's not a big markets and it's not great for TV and this and that, but it's like, these teams emerged from the 32 that started the year on September 16th or 17th at training camp and found a way to get to the end. And so I honestly don't complain about any final. Mike might have issued the odd complaint about the travel between Edmonton and Florida, but that wasn't anything. That wasn't the Panthers or the Oilers' fault, if you know what I'm saying. So I'll take whatever it comes with. And if it's a double Rantanen revenge tour, then I'll write the hell out of that.
Jacob wants to know what playoff moment, he wants us both to answer this. What playoff moment has been your favorite to witness since you started covering the NHL?
Oh, you go first.
I mean, there were some pretty good moments in the first round series between Ottawa and Toronto. In seeing Montreal in the Cup final in 2021 and being in the building for Cup final games, even though there was barely anyone in the building, that's always going to stand out for me. So I would say it's somewhere between that and I think all of the CTC games with hearing the crowd. Like those are right up there for me.
I'll probably go back to 2013 Leafs Bruins Game 7. I mean, that's one of the craziest games I ever saw. It's sort of reminiscent of the Game 7s we saw these last couple of days, but I didn't cover either of those. Obviously, I watched them from my couch. But that was like the one game where I couldn't believe what I was watching in real time, and having to write in real time was chaos. But that's Game 7 of that series. You know, maybe it'll get knocked off the pedestal at some point, but that was one of the truly crazy things I've ever been at. So that's an oldie but a goodie. We'll call it a bit of a clapback reference.
Last one, Rexy wants to know why no commercials in overtime. Seems like a great way to increase hockey-related revenue.
I think it's just all about trying to end the games as quickly as you can, while being fair to the players as well. And so I really think it's that simple. It's just ideally the league doesn't want double and triple overtime. Obviously it's a function of the sport. We saw, Winnipeg was getting down there. Like I was starting to think we might see triple overtime in that Game 7, but it's just to basically have things go as fast as you can. And, in some markets, like these games are starting at like 8:30 local. Like you're getting pretty late if you're getting deep into overtime and you're having commercial breaks and things like that. So, it's just a matter. They do have that one break in overtime where they dry scrape the ice to sort of try to have the playing surface in good working order. But basically, no one wants to spend all night at the rink. As much fun as you might be having on your couch, there's a lot of people working there going like, oh my God, when is this thing going to end?
Yeah, and overtime can be very stressful. Having experienced the 3 overtimes last week, very stressful.
We had 3 and 5 days, man. Like it was great, but
jeez,
that took a few hours of sleep off the board for us.
I'm glad that's all it took. Great work as always, Siege. Thank you to everyone who listened or watched our episode. We'll be back later this week with more playoff content and more NHL news as it happens. Subscribe to the podcast, and we'll talk to you all later this week. Thanks so much, guys.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.